Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Charlie Reese, the RAND Corporation. In a previous life, one of the best years of my life, I had the honor of being the American ambassador in Greece about 20 years ago. I'm pleased to moderate this panel, Geopolitics and Today's Middle East. One is tempted to say that geopolitics are always part of the Middle East, and perhaps never more so than today. I have a great panel. Let me introduce them briefly, and we'll get right into it. Almost at the end, one down from the end is Henri Barkey. Henri Barkey is the Cohen Professor of International Relations at Lehigh University and an adjunct senior fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. I've known Henri for 35 or so years. He's a great analyst of the Middle East and insightful. To his left is Bob Silverman. Bob Silverman is a former colleague of mine in the American Diplomatic Service. He's presently the executive editor of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, a foreign affairs journal that highlights American and Israeli writers. He also lectures on Middle Eastern and Islamic studies at the Department of the Shalem College and spends at least part of the year in Jerusalem, in his home there. And to my immediate left is Howard Schatz. Howard Schatz is a senior economist at the RAND Corporation and a professor at the Pardee RAND Graduate School. His RAND research has included issues related to Ukraine's post-conflict reconstruction that we talked about yesterday, international economic cooperation, and a wide range of work for individual countries all over the world. So I want to start, as one often does on these kinds of things, with the headlines. Today, the headlines are about some sense that the Iranians might strike at Israel in Israeli territory in retribution for an attack on some IRGC militants that were commanders that were in the Iranian embassy in Damascus. And so, Bob, let me ask you, first of all, do you think this is likely? And if it happens, what are the consequences? Does it change the geopolitics of the region?
Thank you, Charlie. In the spirit of the Delphic oracle, I would say it depends on the context. No, I'm just kidding. 2 points, I think. I did talk to people in Israel this morning about this news, and the word there from at least the defense establishment is that the Iranians have passed a message in the usual channels to the Americans. It's a Swiss channel. It's been a long-standing, both parties exchanged messages to each other. So the Iranians have explained to the Americans that if they do retaliate for this attack that happened earlier in Damascus, it will be something like not the kind of attack that requires an escalation. So maybe a pinprick, maybe something similar to the Iranian reaction to the airstrike that killed the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Command in 2019, Qasem Soleimani. So I think this particular event won't be a major attack. The Iranians, of course, could reserve the ability to make a major attack later. And so, yes, I think over time, I think the message here is Iran needs to be contained, and its nuclear program should never reach weapons capability, because once they do have weapons capability, maybe there won't be pinpricks in future.
Okay, well, we may come back repeatedly to Iran, but let me ask you something else before we move on. Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords reached a few years ago at the end of the Trump administration, looked like they were a big deal. They set up formal relations between the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Israel, and later I think Morocco joined. And Israeli UAE trade is booming. Foreign investments in both directions are sharply up. There are Israeli tourists in Dubai. What impact do you think the Abraham Accords have had more broadly for Israel and geopolitics in the region?
Well, It is a great event, and I give full credit to American strategic vision for creating this opportunity for the Middle East. You know, the Middle East is a region where intra-regional trade and investment ties are low, and that describes some of the instability. That's one of the underlying causes. So three things I would think about when I look at the Abraham Accords and the current Gaza war. One is, unlike prior such events, this Abraham Accords initiative hasn't resulted in cutting off ties. If you go back 20 years, you'll recall that during the Second Intifada, that there were 3 Arab countries that initiated ties with Israel. They all 3 cut them off. Tunisia, Oman, and Qatar during the Second Intifada. That hasn't happened. The ties are still there. Embassies are still open. As you noted, trade is still going on. New initiatives are blocked, I think, for the time being. So the first thing is the ties haven't been cut, but and they're continuing, and yet new initiatives. There was a natural gas project between Israel and Morocco that was put on hold. So I think for the time being, projects are on hold. I would say that there's a mixed message coming from the Gulf on this. On one hand, and this is typical, the public-private differences. In private, the Gulf leaders are telling Israeli leaders, you need to finish off Hamas, but you need to do it quickly because this is causing internal problems in our countries. And so they want to see Hamas gone. They have that strategic interest with Israel, but they cannot say so publicly, and they need to have it over quick. It's not going to be over quick. The Gaza war is continuing. This has come up in other panels here. Israel will go into Rafah at the right time. What they're doing right now is preparing the humanitarian supply that the U.S. has demanded to see. They're creating an area on the coast called Mawasi, where the civilian population of Rafah will be moved to. This will take time. This war is going to go on for a while, and unfortunately, you know, the terrorist threat that Israel faces from Hamas will be eliminated. And they're not going anywhere. Egypt and Israel bottled up Hamas leadership, so Israel can afford to take its time. It's not what the Gulf wants, that's for sure. The last thing I would say is that the Abraham Accords is a strategic vision of the United States for the Middle East. It's bipartisan. It was started in the Trump administration. It's been continuing under the Biden administration, and it will continue in the following administration. And it really is counterfactual to see the U.S. is withdrawing from the Middle East, given what it's done so far in the Gulf War and what its strategic vision is.
Thank you. Henri, if I could turn to you. Another big player in the geopolitics of the Middle East is Turkey, Greece's neighbor, and a country at times challenging for Greece to understand and manage relationships with. But Turkey has also played a significant role in the other geopolitical conflict going on now, the war in Ukraine, by negotiating, facilitating export of Ukrainian wheat and other grains in the first year of the war. What do you think Turkey's geopolitical objectives are now in the region?
In the region, meaning the Middle East or Ukraine?
Middle East.
Middle East.
Well, the entire region,
Right.
including the Black Sea sort of corridors.
Look, President Erdogan has always wanted to play a major role in the Middle East. He fancies himself as kind of the leader of the region. He essentially said, if you remember when he first came to power, they had this policy of zero problems with the neighbors. That changed essentially with problems with almost every neighbor in the region. And then it changed again because he realized that he was being excluded from all kinds of deals in the region, and it was costing Turkey. So he started to have a rapprochement with all these countries with which he had problems. I mean, if you think that he went after the Egyptian President Sisi, and then a few weeks ago he went to Cairo. He went after the Prime Minister of Greece, and he went to Athens. So he's made overtures to every country in the region in order to reestablish his relations. The problem is for him is that, yes, the Egyptians agree, everybody will welcome him, but I don't think anybody trusts him. And that's his main problem at the moment. And people think that he wants to dominate them rather than be a regular partner. Israel was the one country with which he obviously has had very serious problem, and he even started a rapprochement with Israel until we saw with the Gaza war, when the day after the October 7, he came out in full support of Hamas, and that essentially created a major break for the Israelis in the sense that Erdogan wants to play a big role in the post-war reconstruction. He sees himself having had a long relationship with Hamas. He wants to see Turkey involved, but I suspect the Israelis will never allow him anywhere near Gaza. And you can be sure that if the stories that Erdogan is coming to Washington to see President Biden are true, one of the things he's going to ask for is for American support to push the Israelis to let him back into Gaza and the Middle East. This week, Turkey announced sanctions on Israel. I don't think they're very serious, but he had to do something because we can talk about later. He just had municipal elections where his party and himself were trounced, so he's much weaker. And so he's trying to do things to change the conversation at home and get greater support.
Is there significant Israeli-Turkish trade that might be disrupted?
There is significant Turkish-Israeli trade. Paradoxically, it is all vastly in Turkey's favor, right? Not just in terms of direct goods being shipped to Israel, steel, all kinds of manufactured goods, food, but also there's always been a great influx of Israeli tourists to Turkey, which bring enormous amount of foreign currency. And you have to put this in the context of the Turkish economy, which is in real serious, and that's something maybe we should talk later, but is in serious trouble. It's not just that they have high inflation, but the current account deficit is really in deep crisis. They're having trouble finding dollars. And so if you alienate Israeli tourists, if you stop trade with Israel, exports to Israel, it's going to cost you.
Yeah, right. I mean, you have less scope. One quick question, Bob. Do you think that the Israelis are going to give the Turks any role in post-war Gaza reconstruction if they have anything to say about it?
No. That was a quick one.
Thought that.
Absolutely. Not only that, they won't give NATO a role because Turkey's in NATO. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see how that unfolds. Howard, let me bring you in here. There has been a real focus on transit corridors. Years ago, the Chinese laid out the Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese are major investors here in Piraeus container facility. And more recently, the G7 has spoken in favor of something called an India-Middle East Europe corridor, IMEC corridor, as somehow a response or whatnot. And I have to admit that I used to think that these things were sort of pie in the sky, but now we have the Houthis striking shipping in the Red Sea and a whole line of container ships going around the Cape of Good Hope. Can you tell us what is happening on the transit corridors, what the significance is, and what it would mean for Greece?
Well, thanks, Charlie. The transit corridors are significant. Let me jump straight to the last point you made. The IMEC, is it serious? I think it's too soon to say. Right? We need to see further planning. We need to see money put up. As an example, Nabucco was serious until it was not serious. So we'll have to see.
Nabucco is a pipeline that was going to go across Turkey and take gas up into the middle of Europe.
Named after some of the originators saw the opera, Nabucco.
Right.
So art-inspiring transit. So let me start with Greece. What does it mean for Greece? That's important. So first of all, we have, as you said, the investment in the port of Piraeus. That was a phenomenal change. It has increased traffic at the port between 2007 and 2022 by more than 250%. It has made Piraeus the second busiest port in the Mediterranean, just a little bit behind Valencia. And it has made the port more efficient, and shippers like efficient ports. Now, I understand in Greece there are some second thoughts. There's been some controversy about this, environmental issues, labor issues, but there have been serious achievements. There's a second part of Greece as a terminus of corridors. So transportation corridors is not just about moving things or transportation, it's moving gas as well. And for Greece, we can point to two things. We can point to Andropolis, the LNG terminal with the Bulgaria interconnector. That's not quite Middle East, but we can call it Middle East adjacent. They can take LNG from anywhere. Second is the potential East Med pipeline, which is much more serious than IMEC or Nabucco with its terminus in southern Greece, in the Peloponnese, or pushed forward partly because of Russia. So Greece has a growing role in this as a terminus and will have an even bigger role if IMEC comes about. There's a third factor that makes this serious, and that's that there are strong push and strong pull factors. So let me go with the push factors. The push factors are that, first of all, China's manufacturing capacity is now a third of global manufacturing capacity. So it exports. It has to export. The rest of the world consumes. And the route through the Middle East is a short route to a lot of different places. You compound that with Middle Eastern governments, in particular Gulf governments, with all of their future plans, 2030, 2025, whatever, diversification out of oil and gas. A big part of that is transportation and logistics. So there's more push factor for Middle East as a corridor. And in fact, trade from China to Africa, a lot of it goes into processing zones in the United Arab Emirates. There's a very interesting pull factor also, not just European consumption. You would think that goods from Asia, all of Asia, would go through the Suez, as we are learning, to Europe. But in the United States, there's ferocious competition between the West Coast ports and the East Coast ports. The natural route from Asia is Pacific to the West Coast ports. The East Coast ports are generally doing a better job of dredging, so they can handle bigger ships, bigger than post-Panamax, and they're doing a better job of installing better logistics, and the bulk of the US market is closer to the East Coast. So we're seeing more and more Asia trade come through the Middle East, through Suez, to the East Coast, to reach the American market.
All of which, though, is in question with the Houthi attacks on the Red Sea.
So the Houthi attacks, we are losing efficiency in transport because now ships are routing under Africa, right? And so between the competition between East Coast ports, West Coast ports, we're certainly going to see more transit to West Coast ports, but the fact remains the West Coast ports have not been as aggressive at dredging, and so just can't handle the size of the ships that the East Coast can.
Right, but on the Houthis, I was really struck, presumably others were, when the defense minister on Wednesday pointed out that traffic through Piraeus was down 60% this quarter because of the impact of ships going around the Cape of Good Horn, the Cape of Good Hope. There's a Cape Horn and a Cape of Good Hope. The Cape of Good Hope. And what I never realized quite how much Piraeus was essentially a Suez Canal port. It's the first port after the Suez Canal, and if the Suez Canal doesn't get traffic because there's a ship stuck in it, or because there's a bunch of terrorists shooting rockets at passing ships in the Red Sea, that affects the Greek economy, and that affects the shippers that would otherwise use that.
Right. It's affecting more than the Greek economy. First of all, it's affecting the Greek economy through Piraeus. It's badly affecting the Egyptian economy because Egypt depends on revenues through the Suez. Even beyond that, China has made major investments in export zones, other business zones in that corridor through Egypt. So that's going to be damaged too. We can move from there into kind of a logistics planning question. If I'm an ocean carrier, if I'm a shipper, how much do I want to risk going through this route? Do I think the route will become safe at some point? And then we can jump to a geopolitical question. One of the early operations of the U.S. Marine Corps was defeating pirates, the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean. You have to ask, and I don't have an answer, you have to ask is why, when the entire world depends on this shipping route, can the combined armed forces of the world not do something about a small rogue terrorist group, which is really damaging global shipping? And so for that, I would bump that to the political leaders and the military leaders to ask them about the costs and risks.
Yeah, well, we probably, it would have been interesting to hear General Petraeus' notion of that. But if we're talking geopolitics, and if geopolitics relates to shipping and relates to economic relationships, that in that context, these land corridors, either the IMEC concept, which is not real, there's no stuff moving through an IMEC corridor. There's no money behind it, as far as I know, but it could be that it's one of those ideas that is coming. What do you think, Henri? Do you think, and where do you think Turkey will come down on the IMEC corridor? Is this something that is consistent with its vision of itself as a bridge between Europe and Asia?
Well, Turkey has always wanted to be a conduit. I mean, to the extent that, one of Erdogan's actually great achievements was to try to turn Turkey into some kind of a trading state. I mean, it wants to trade with everybody. So war in Ukraine doesn't really interrupt Turkish-Russian trade. So, I mean, it's very pragmatic in that sense. There are maybe other factors that affect this, but Turkey in general has looked at every possibility of increasing its trade relationship. In fact, the fact that it was kept out of the East Med pipeline, although I don't think that pipeline is going to be built, but the gas forum is a serious project, I think is one of the things that really angered Erdogan and made Erdogan far more aggressive on these issues, because Turkey is not benefiting from gas that's so close to its... But this is partially Erdogan's problem, because he doesn't know how to... because he's so sure of himself, of his power, that he thinks people will essentially accede to his demands. I mean, he could have achieved a lot of his goals through diplomacy. But being IMEC is something he would very much want to be part of, but he's not, right? And so, I mean, that's, yeah.
I'd like to turn for a minute to the other big regional power that has, if you will, geopolitical aspirations, and that's Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, it has a young a leader known by his initials MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who has scoped out a very aggressive strategy for post-oil economic development, for development of hydrogen, energy resources, and so forth. And among the things that he has recently done is to reach out to Tehran, to the Iranians, to say, is there, to reopen communications channels to them, I think reflecting the fact that, and this is what the commentators have said, because they're afraid that the United States is less interested in the Gulf, and that the Saudis once could rely on Washington to deter any untoward activities by the Iranians in the Gulf. But it's been suggested that because there is some doubt as to what Washington's opinion is, that Riyadh is trying to reach out, organize its own defense directly rather than through an intermediary. Do you see any logic to that? Does that make sense to you? Yes, Henri.
Look, I think the people's worry about the United States pulling out of the Middle East is overblown. I don't think the United States, it demonstrated by sending 2 aircraft carriers at the beginning of the Gaza crisis, And yesterday we saw the Southern Command Chief go to Israel because of the threat. I think the United States understands the importance of oil and gas coming from the Middle East, even if the United States doesn't need any of this gas, even though there is this hope that one day we will move into a renewable energy environment. The fact of the matter is, I would very much recommend everybody to read Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor of President Biden's Foreign Affairs piece 3 issues ago, where I had never seen a National Security Advisor ever express a strategy that is so political economy centered and not classical security. It's all about how the United States will interact with the world from an economic perspective, or a political economic perspective. And that means, to me at least, that the last thing the United States wants to see is any disruption in the price of oil, because everybody uses oil one way or the other. It's going to continue for a long time. And the Middle East, in that sense, it has major countries, Egypt, Turkey, and Iran being large population centers. There's no way the United States will pull out of the Middle East because of its economic interests. Forget about the security factors. So why is MBS doing what he's doing with Iran? Look, I'm not a Saudi expert. It may be just, let's be nice to them so they won't bother us. I mean, just it doesn't cost them anything, right? And MBS shows that he is, that's him. That he is a major actor, that he can also act. And I don't think the United States is necessarily opposed to that. I mean, it's not something that costs anything.
Bob, can I talk to you about Jerusalem's attitude towards Saudi Arabia now? It was much talked about in the months before October 7th, that the Saudis, mediated by the United States, were working on a deal which would be three-sided. The United States would give some benefits to Saudi Arabia, perhaps some sort of a defense arrangement, and the Israelis would get the recognition from Riyadh that they had been waiting for, and perhaps some trade. It was, as it was reported, it was stymied on the reluctance of Jerusalem to make any commitment to a Palestinian future, or words to that effect. Gaza has now started. The war is 6 months old. The Saudis have been relatively quiet on the war itself, and as you mentioned earlier, all the Gulf Arabs have stayed in touch with the Israelis, some overtly, some otherwise. How do you see the Gulf initiatives seen from Jerusalem? And what do they expect a long-term freeze, a short-term freeze? Do they have a strategy? What are they trying to do, and what role do they see for Washington?
Thank you. Well, first, let me just throw a little cold water on and agree with Henri on the so-called Iranian-Saudi rapprochement, because Saudi Arabia traditionally has relations with Iran, correct relations. They have to, because they're the custodians of the Mecca. You know, all Muslim countries visit Mecca through pilgrims. You have to issue pilgrim visas. Those numbers have to be, every country, you know, gets a quota. There are all kinds of traditional diplomacy that happens. Those are normal relations. Saudi manages a relationship with Iran through normal relations. They're kind of back to a normal situation. They don't trust each other. Sometimes they completely break relations. Let's remember a few years ago, Iran sacked the Saudi consulate in Iran. An Iranian crowd did it with governmental support. That caused a break. They're now back to normal relations. I don't read too much into that. As for Jerusalem, everyone sees the synergy that could happen between the region's largest economy is Saudi Arabia, you know, one of the G20 largest economies in the world, and region's third largest economy, Israel, which is, there's a lot of synergies there. Israel has all kinds of high-tech solutions to Saudi problems in the security field, in the military field, and in others. And they share common strategic interests. It'll be gradual. Saudi Arabia, sees itself as the country that, leader of the Muslim world, not just the Arab world. And so the king styles himself the custodian of the two holy mosques, right? Mecca and Medina. So, and they have to consider not only Saudi public opinion, but world Islamic opinion. So, and other countries were waiting, including Indonesia, for Saudi gradual steps. So I think that normalization will happen gradually. As always, as it happened first with Egypt in 1979, there'll be a U.S. mediation. The U.S. is deeply involved in this three-way negotiation, and I believe it will continue. I do believe, I initially, Charlie, shared your skepticism about the IMEC, the India-Middle East Europe corridor. I no longer am so skeptical, and I'll explain why if I have a minute.
Sure.
Yes, there's no structure to this deal yet, but I see actions happening inside countries on both ends. In India, they're upgrading ports in anticipation of more traffic through the Middle East to Europe. In Europe, certain countries are competing with each other to be the end terminal of this route. So in France, they actually have established an office and a special envoy to promote a French port as the port for this corridor. The Greek Prime Minister visited India partly with this mission. So Piraeus will be competing with other European ports to be the end terminal and, let the best port win or something, right? But in the meantime, the Middle East is frozen because of the Gaza war. And yet, to your point, there already is traffic. There already are boats coming from ships, coming from India, offloading in Dubai and being trucked across to places like Haifa in the Mediterranean. It's already happening on a low level. The question is, can it be scaled up through a big railroad? I know you're skeptical. I'm less skeptical.
Let me just understand the geography. Trucked across Saudi Arabia, up Jordan, and then into Israel?
Correct. It's already happening. You can see goods. You can go to Haifa and see ports already.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm not going to overestimate that.
All right.
But final point is there are ways of tying all these issues together. Part of what Saudi Arabia would like to see, and I've heard this from Saudi source, not from an Israeli source, is that the end terminal on the Middle East part be Gaza. That in a post-Hamas situation, Gaza gets rebuilt as the end port of a railroad terminal that starts in Dubai. Okay. So we'll see.
Well, there's no conversation about geopolitics that doesn't include China. And I want to ask Howard about China. At the beginning of his term, Xi Jinping made a big announcement, Belt and Road Initiative, and they've invested, of course, here, but many other ports and railroads in Africa and so forth. Tell us both how it's going. There has been some press coverage suggesting that they were slowing it up, that they were reducing the amount of investment that they were making. Is this because economic realities or their geopolitical ambitions have lessened, and how does that affect the Middle East?
Yeah. So the big question about whether Belt and Road was serious was actually a question being asked in China shortly after it was announced. I remember some colleague and I were on a research trip in 2015 talking to professors and to a few select Chinese think tanks, and each time we would ask, so what is Belt and Road? Is it a strategy? Is it an initiative? And the answer we got consistently was, we're not sure. We're not sure. But it is serious, it is real, and I think the best way to look at it is a natural continuation of China's kind of outward connectivity. So I would date it back to the Go West effort, which was the late 90s, possibly even beforehand. And I think it's been fairly successful. It's met stated Chinese goals. Part of this is because once you say that you will favor Belt and Road, every project under the sun will say, yes, we're Belt and Road too, in case there are any kind of benefits. But there has been significant lending and construction. So the second point that I make about Belt and Road, first, it's something of a natural continuation. Second, we always talk about Belt and Road as an investment project. It's not an investment project. It is a massive lending and construction project. And when we look at the financing, it is a financing project. Money is largely coming from China Export-Import Bank, China Development Bank. And that leads, the financing issue comes to, is China slowing down? What's happening with it? It was known from the beginning, it was known from the beginning that not all of these loans would pay off. They did not all pay off. The big question was it known that they would be losing because they were for strategic purposes? Probably some of them. But these banks and China don't want to lose money anyway. So there were some bad bets, there were some very good bets. If we look at the whole continuum, so from go west all the way to Belt and Road and then to the future, where does the Middle East fit in this? Middle East has an enormous role. If we look at data, and I'm going to just look at contracting data because that's what Belt and Road is. If we look at contracting data from China between 2005 and 2023, almost half of all logistics and transportation contracting by China is in the Middle East. And the Middle East is not half the global economy, right? So why the Middle East? Well, Belt and Road consists of two components. The Maritime Silk Road, so the road is on the water, and the Silk Road Economic Belt. The Middle East is the only region where both of these concepts come together. It's connectivity between Asia and Europe and Africa. And so there's a big effort in the Middle East. It's expanded since then. I do want to add that after Xi Jinping announced the transportation issues and a few other issues, we came the digital Silk Road. And China is, again, very active there, building out ICT infrastructure in the Middle East, which is leading to some tensions with the United States.
But does it change the geopolitics itself, or is it modernization?
It changes the ICT in particular changes the geopolitics. Traditionally, while China's main interest in the region has been economic, China has been able to benefit from this because of the security umbrella provided by the United States. We are getting to the point where the United States has been very, very clear about ICT issues, that if use of Chinese ICT were to somehow compromise the US military, US security mission, our partnership with the Middle East would be lowered. And so then you can say, well, the Middle East would then seek others to provide that security. There is no one else to provide that security.
All right.
So that's the tension.
All right, I want to end with a quick round on Iran. Iran, I think most of us would agree, most of the audience might agree, that the Iranians, as they look at the region, they would like to upset the geopolitics. They would like to have a bigger role. They would like to be in charge, in a sense, as the primus inter pares for the Gulf. Just a quick yes or no from the three of you as and they use all these proxies and their investment in Syria and so forth to accomplish that goal. So I'd like to ask you, in 5 years, do you think we come back here to Delphi, will we find that the Iranians have succeeded in upsetting the geopolitics of the Middle East? Let me start with you, Howard, and go down.
You want a point estimate from an economist?
I want a yes or no.
I am a reckless economist. No.
Okay. No. One no. Henri?
No.
And Bob?
I think there'll be a new Iran in 5 years, but let's hope. The Red Sea mission stops, by the way, the Houthi attacks when Iran is stopped, because all those missiles are coming from Iran. And there are only 3 countries in the world right now. We talked about the global nature of it. There are 3 navies that are working right now that send ships. One of them is the U.S. and 2 of its allies, Britain and Greece. So bravo sas to the Greeks for carrying the world's mission to let open the sea lanes. Can I also just mention I have copies of this magazine that I'm the editor of. If you want them, I'll bring them to you. They're right here.
Okay, well, let me thank a terrific panel, great conversation, and we'll see you all in 5 years. Thank you.